And while migrants wait to disembark in Sicily, the European Parliament has been debating the issue of migrants arriving by land, including the fate of a Syrian man allegedly killed by Greek soldiers. 22-year-old Mohammed al-Arab died in March after shots were fired from the Greek side of the border. Home Affairs Commissioner Ilya Johansson made it clear that pushing migrants back from the borders was unacceptable.
Pushbacks are clearly forbidden. Everyone has the right to apply for asylum. All allegations of pushbacks, abuse, violence must be investigated. We expect the national authorities to do so. The Commission has no power to investigate alleged misconduct of Member States' law enforcement authorities.
We're joined now by Shona Murray from The Bridge, our studio in the heart of the European Parliament. Good evening to you, Shona. It's been an emotive debate. What were the main points that were raised?
Yeah, that's right, Oliver, an extremely emotive debate. But I think primarily what you saw there was two Greek ministers and the European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ilya Johansson, being grilled by MEPs essentially over this situation where at least two refugees are alleged to have died at the hands of Greek security forces. But overall, really, the discussion was about the fact that 5 years on from the height of the refugee crisis in 2015, and the EU doesn't appear to be any closer to getting this refugee pact or a consensus around it. And take a listen to Dutch MEP Sophie in 't Veld, really putting it to the Commissioner that she keeps pandering to the Member States that are not for getting a sensible resolution to the refugee crisis.
The Greek border is a European border. The refugees in Greece are refugees in Europe. They are a common responsibility. So we desperately need a plan for a comprehensive asylum and migration policy. And we've been waiting for that for months and months and months, and we keep getting signals that it's going to be pushed back further and further. And we need for the Commission to stop catering to the unconstructive and the uncooperative Member States.
So that's Dutch MEP for Renew, Sophie in 't Veld. I'm joined now, though, by Barry Andrews, Irish MEP, also for Renew, and Fianna Fáil for Ireland. Barry, you saw that debate. I suppose, first of all, primarily it was about the death of Mohammed al-Arab, a Syrian from Aleppo who found his way to Turkey 5 years ago and apparently dies at the hands of Greek security forces. It's a really depressing but a real, I suppose, not unusual tale of a refugee. Yeah,
well, unfortunately, that's absolutely accurate. And I think the committee expressed its frustration about that. And there's two things that really strike me about it. First of all, that this individual is the very definition of a refugee, somebody who is fleeing a well-founded fear of persecution from a war zone, a 22-year-old man who has known nothing but war all his life. And the second thing is that while there is some sort of sympathy for the Greek government and everything that they've had to endure, there is no threshold where it is justified to use violence. There's no threshold where you can breach the Geneva Convention, where you can ignore basic human rights, and pushbacks, of course, are completely illegal. So the frustration that was expressed today, I think, was partly to do with the identity of the individual, the evidence that's there, and the fact that the Greek government are simply in denial about the facts.
And Ilya Johansson, the Commissioner, she said it there today, pushbacks are illegal. We're not allowed to send people back to a war zone or to any third country where they could be persecuted. But it happens, it's happening. We saw those clashes at the border. And similarly with your point about the Greek government, are we becoming desensitized to these stories? Is that why they're ongoing?
Well, people talk about compassion fatigue. You don't hear of trivia fatigue. People aren't bored of the trivia that obsesses their lives. But I think the compassion that we need for the individuals. I visited Lesbos myself just a few months back, obviously before the lockdown, and the conditions under which they're living on EU territory are completely unacceptable. Now, I know the Greek government are trying to move people on, particularly vulnerable people. So I think the EU has a case to answer because there hasn't been sufficient support in terms of a common asylum and refugee policy. There hasn't been official support in terms of safe passages for those who are recognised as refugees. So there's an awful lot that needs to be done there.
And on that compassion fatigue, if you look back in 2015, there was a much more united response, I suppose, in theory, with people in member states trying to help refugees. Obviously, we saw the 1 million refugees coming to Germany and Austria. The Greeks, though, in fairness, it looks like they've been abandoned with regard to this part of the refugee crisis.
Yeah, well, this is where I have sympathy for the Greek government, because there was a plan to distribute fairly across the European Union numbers of refugees. And when you think that Turkey had 3 million refugees within its borders for all of the period up to 2015, and a mere, if I can say, a mere million that came into the European Union after 2016, and suddenly it was a crisis. So there has to be some fairness here. And I think what the EU has to do in particular, it has to go to the source of this. The source of this is the Syrian conflict. There is no currently EU special representative to the Syrian conflict. We're coming up to the 10th anniversary of the conflict in March of next year. I think we need to take that seriously. We need to be applying all of our diplomatic weight to try and bring parties together to develop the relationship building, the trust building that is a key cornerstone for peace building in the future.
Barry Andrews, Irish MEP for Renew. And it's back to you in Leon. Oliver.